The broadcast tower stood tall, its skeletal frame stretching into the twilight sky. An artifact of a bygone era. It had been silent for decades, forgotten by the world and overshadowed by sleek satellites and streaming platforms, but one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a strange, ghostly signal crackled to life. Amara Hayes, a middle-aged history professor, was driving home from campus when her car's radio, long silent and used only as a clock, suddenly began to hiss and whine. Startled, she glanced at the dashboard. The analog display flickered. And then, against all odds, an old-timey voice floated through the speakers. "And this is WSKR signing off. But first, a message for the future. If you can hear this, remember, the way out is always in." Amara frowned. She hadn't touched the dial. The voice had an eerie clarity, as though the announcer were in the car with her. Before she could process it, the signal cut off, leaving only static. That night, she couldn't shake the odd feeling. "The way out is always in," she repeated, scribbling it in her journal. It was nonsensical, yet it echoed in her mind like a forgotten dream. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about the broadcast. She scoured archives and online forums, hoping someone else had heard it. Eventually, she found a single reference to WSKR, a defunct radio station that had operated in the 1940s, transmitting from the abandoned tower on the edge of town. Intrigued, Amara drove out to the site. The tower loomed like a rusted monument, surrounded by a thicket of weeds. Beneath it was a decrepit shack housing ancient broadcasting equipment. Dust coated everything, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. As she explored, she found a small journal tucked into a metal drawer. The handwriting was shaky and uneven. Dated 1946. The entries described a peculiar experiment, a broadcast meant to transcend time. The station's crew believed they had cracked a way to send messages to the future. The final entry read, "The signal is set. If the message is ever received, know this. The way out is always in." Amara's pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. She tried to leave but felt a strange pull, as though the air around her had thickened. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but when she looked, the screen displayed nothing but a spinning, glowing circle. Then, she heard it again. The same voice from her car. Only this time it came from the old speaker system in the shack. "The way out is always in. Follow the sound." The static morphed into a faint hum, a melody that seemed to come from the depths of the tower itself. Against her better judgment, Amara followed it, climbing the crumbling stairs to the very top. There, she found a small, antique radio, untouched by time. Its dial glowed faintly, though it wasn't plugged into anything. The hum was louder here, almost melodic. As she reached for the dial, the world shifted around her. Suddenly, she was no longer atop the tower. She stood in a city bathed in perpetual twilight, its streets empty yet alive with whispers. The sky shimmered with unearthly hues, and buildings twisted into impossible shapes. A figure appeared, cloaked in shadows but with eyes that glowed like the radio's dial. It spoke without moving its lips. "You found the way in. But now, can you find the way out?" Quote. Before she could answer, the world began to dissolve. Every step she took brought her to a different place. A childhood memory, a vivid dream, a long-forgotten regret. She wandered through these fragments of her life, each one more surreal than the last. She began to understand. The way out wasn't physical. It was something deeper, facing her fears, accepting her mistakes, and letting go of what she couldn't change. Finally, she returned to the city of twilight, the figure waiting silently. This time, the whispers around her were softer, almost peaceful. "The way out is always in," she said aloud. The figure nodded. The world collapsed into darkness, and she awoke in her car, parked outside her house. The clock on the dashboard read 7:43 p.m. The exact time she had first heard the broadcast. The signal was gone. But Amara was different now. She felt lighter, as though a burden she hadn't realized she carried was gone. From that day on, she never heard the strange signal again. Yet, sometimes, in her dreams, she still saw the figure, waiting at the edge of twilight, watching her with glowing eyes.